Mike Beckett here from The Dead Prophet. We hope you enjoy this part one, which is broken into three parts of a series that we're beginning on making a leader shift, becoming a holistic leader, where we are shifting our focus from building and growing our corporate church to going back to the Great Commission of Matthew 28 and making disciples. John Szymanski is joining me and talking about his 50 years of experience. So we hope you enjoy this first part of part one, making a leader shift. Hi, welcome to The Dead Prophet. I'm your host, Mike Beckett. It is an honor and joy to have with us a longtime friend, John Szymanski, on the show. And today we're going to kind of talk about leadership in the church and some challenges with leadership. But just a little quick bio on John Szymanski. He's been married to his wife, Linda, for 51 years. You have 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren. You served as a pastor, missionary, coach, consultant for 50 years. In fact, you were our pastor when we lived down kind of right on that Berks, Lancaster County border. You've been in ministry, started out in inner city ministry in Pittsburgh. So I'm assuming you're a Steelers fan.
Linda is a Steelers fan.
Okay.
I watch them when they're on TV, but she is a diehard.
Okay, great. Yeah, so is Shauna. I'm not into football, so they worked at Wycliffe Bible Translators, serving as missionaries in Papua New Guinea at the Wycliffe International Headquarters in Huntington Beach, California. While you were in California, you served as a Southwest Associate Regional Director, overseeing Wycliffe Ministries in 5 different states, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you went to England and were kind of working with working as missionaries, working with 2 Iranian Persian-speaking ministries, and the focus was to reach the Persian-speaking people, correct?
Yeah, working with a Persian-speaking church as well as a Bible school, and so we were training, Persian speakers.
Mm-hmm.
We had significant contacts throughout the Middle East, and also had a lot of contact with church in Iran.
Great. And then you returned back to the States in '99 and kind of pastored at 3 large churches, kind of, you called them multi-campus churches. I remember the church we were at, you were at the Hopewell. It was multi-campus. They had a network there, and I knew you had moved down toward Maryland and back into Pennsylvania. So you've had quite an experience in ministry over the 50 years of doing ministry. And now you work for Standing Stone Ministry. Tell us a little bit about what Standing Stone Ministry is.
Linda and I have been involved with Standing Stone Ministry for 2 years now.
Okay.
And Standing Stone is the largest ministry dedicated to leader care in the States, even though our reach is beyond the U.S. into the U.K. and also in different parts of the world. And so Standing Stone has about 300 shepherd leaders who care for probably 3,300 pastors and ministry leaders every month. And when you do the math, you put it all together, the cumulative total is probably over 1 million people that are being affected. It's called the ripple effect.
Yeah. Definitely. And your passion with working with this obviously is to see the leaders lead well, lead with excellence, have healthy cultures that are created within the church, have church ministries that are thriving, and really focusing on the Great Commission. And I remember we had connected due to a post I saw on Facebook, and it kind of drew my attention because if we are to be honest with ourselves, that is not the focus of our churches today, especially here in America, where we're really having thriving ministries that focus on completing the Great Commission. Rather, we're having thriving ministries that are, how much bigger and better can my church be? How can I be the upcoming Joel Osteen, so to speak, or somebody like that? And we're using those mega churches as models instead of going back to Matthew 28 in the Great Commission and really going out and making disciples in our churches today. You sent me a few statistics on the state of pastors and ministry leaders in America, and I looked through them, and I was actually kind of I had to take a pause because it stunned me. It really And would you share some of those with us?
What was interesting when we started with Standing Stone, and we did a deep dive into what is going on with pastors and ministry leaders. We were rather taken back by it all. Um, and it surprised me only because I've been a part of it for 50 years. And when you are a part of it, you don't realize, actually what's going on. And then when you take a step back and you step outside the aquarium and you look inside and you realize that things are not as good as you thought they were. And of course, some of the statistics that we discovered, I said, yes, been there, done that, felt that. Some of them, I'm not sure if you have them that
Yeah.
up on the screen. 10% of ministers who start ministry years ago are now 10% of ministers who started ministry years ago are now finishing ministry. So not a that's a sobering statistic. 50% of ministers beginning ministry today will only last 5 years. And it just goes on and on. 70% of pastors struggle with loneliness and they don't have a close friend to confide in. And of course, that's where Standing Stone comes in. Pastors have a tendency, and Mike, this firsthand. We have a tendency of being lone rangers. Pastors can be insecure. They don't really know who to trust, and so they have a tendency of going it alone. And when we're facing a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, we have a tendency of retreating into isolation, and that's a dangerous place to be. And that's really Standing Stone comes along side pastors and ministry leaders, and we become a trusted voice for them. They're able to talk with us, they're able to confide in us, they can do so without a threat that somehow this information is gonna leak to someone, putting their role or their job in jeopardy.
You know,
Some of the other statistics, 90% of pastors feel they're not adequately trained to cope with ministry demands. 70% of pastors in America are battling depression. And then 29% of pastors thought about quitting ministry based on a survey in 2021. And then 9 months later, that number jumped to 38. March 2022, that number went to 42. And more current information is that it's now dropped to 33%. That means one third of the ministry workforce, has actually thought of throwing in the towel and doing something else. And then the final statistic, which I find to be very, very sad, is that 18% of pastors last year thought about self-harm and suicide. So, what when I take a step back and I look at it, I can see that we're experiencing a leadership crisis. We're also experiencing a mental health crisis.
yeah,
And we're also experiencing a spiritual crisis in the church today.
it's multifaceted here.
It
I
is.
mean, when you talked and said that 70% of pastors struggle with loneliness, um, and don't have a friend to confide in, I think about um, I think about that vulnerability. Um, it must be difficult for a pastor when you come to a church and you want to build relationships with people to allow yourself to really become friends with people within the congregation, because then that vulnerability is there. And it's almost like a pride thing, because it's like I can't show them my weakness, because if I do, what will they think? And then on top of that, with the depression and anxiety, I know there's a big stigma in Christianity about mental health. Like you're not supposed to be depressed. If you've got mental health issues, we don't go to counselors. You go to these people who cast out your devils. I mean, we've got things so warped, and it's just concerning on so many levels. And so you guys at Standing Stone kind of walk through these journeys with individuals, and kind of just like, hey, let's be real and focus back to that core of why you're here.
There's the hope is that we can help prevent a crisis.
Right.
You build a relationship with a pastor or a ministry leader, and that could be a faith-based nonprofit leader. That could be a marketplace leader, whomever it is. Um, the goal is to build the relationship before a crisis occurs, so that you have a relationship there and you can walk through the crisis with them seamlessly. But listen, I've been a pastor for for many years, and most of the people that would come and see me, um, uh, they would sit in front of me, and either the house is entirely on fire, or we have at least the top floor of the house on fire. So you're doing your best to kind of put out the fire that has already started, and then help them manage the crisis from that point on. At least my experience is most of the people, that we're dealing with are people who are, calling in and they need somebody to talk to. That means either the house is on fire, or part of the house is on fire, or we're catching them, later on in the process, in that where it's kind of an internal rebuilding process. The house is burned down, and they're on the tail end trying to deal with all of the effects and the results of what has happened. For example, a former pastor that I talked with, he was bivocational, got a hold of his name. He was referred to me. He called me, um, and the marriage had completely dissolved, family separated, many kids. And even though he was bivocational and it didn't shake him financially, like it does for many, the fragmentation and the devastation was significant. And so here I am talking to a guy who's very broken, doesn't have a marriage any longer. His wife is living in another state. His family is separated. Everything that he had hoped and dreamed for had dissolved right around him.
And I know we're going to get into talking here in a few moments here about the different myths in ministry that leaders tend to believe while they're in ministry. But what do you think, just taking that person, for example, what do you think the root cause of a lot of this is? Would you say it's more spiritual, or it's more maybe there's a burnout level, a kind of like, wave rocking the boat of emotions of dealing with people, and then in the midst of trying to fix everybody else, you have now lost total anchorage in your own anchoring into Christ, that as a result of that, that just is an inferno. Do you think that's more of what you're seeing in these types of situations?
It's probably all of the above. Again, the statistic that I quoted, and it was up on the screen, is 70% of pastors struggle with loneliness.
Mhm.
So, so when you go into a pastor a church, or if you're going in to lead a ministry, it's always good to have somebody, a partner that you can talk with and you can share struggles with. Most pastors don't have that. So they don't know who they can trust, and as a result, they're not able to talk with anybody. And then they end up talking to somebody late in the game. By that time, again, the house is on fire, and that's an issue. But again, pastors, can be insecure. They don't know who it is that they can trust. Um, I haven't come across a denomination and a network of churches that has a standing stone component built into it. Now, again, a lot will provide some kind of a prayer circle, for pastors to get together. But if you can just kind of imagine a pastor coming to a prayer circle, maybe there's just two or three of them, and they're battling marital disharmony. There are a lot of struggles within the marriage. They've got issues with kids. They've got all kinds of things going on. They're struggling with addiction, because the addiction now has, become that thing that they have sought out to help them get through. The chances of them opening up to two or three people is nil. I would
Yeah.
never do it. My fear would be, I want to be vulnerable, but I don't know if what I'm going to say to you is going to leak beyond this group and get back to someone who, may have the power to change my role or
Mhm.
affect my job. And so again, the secret sauce with Standing Stone is that we come alongside one-on-one with pastors and ministry leaders, and we build trusted, ongoing relationships with them, where they can talk about anything they want to talk about, and they know that the information that they're going to share with us is not going anywhere. We're not counselors, we're not therapists. Interesting, yeah. Again, a lot of denominations and networks of churches and that. If a pastor or ministry leader is experiencing some kind of issue, it could be a brownout, a burnout, preemptive measure so that they don't drop out. There's issues that they're facing within their person, within their family, within their that's having an effect on them. What they'll do is they'll send them to a counselor, to a therapist. Well, given the fact that 70% of churches in America today are 100 members and less, and pastors are struggling just to put food on the table, I can't imagine that they're going to have the financial bandwidth to be able to come up with the kind of money to meet with a counselor or a therapist every single week over a 6-month period. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, because it takes that long just to build a relationship and start making positive forward to then you can go bi-weekly and then monthly.
Well,
What go ahead.
with them,
Mhm.
you do. Well, you go it alone, and then, but again with Standing Stone, we come in. There's no charge, because every Standing Stone shepherd leader and that they raise monthly support, and as a result of that, they're able to meet with pastors on a regular basis at no cost to them whatsoever, and
Mhm.
so it alleviates the financial stress on top of all the other stress that they're facing.
Yeah. So why is this a concern for the American church? I know it's a loaded question. I sent you some loaded questions. Why is this a concern for the American church? I mean, I'm sure with the 50 years of ministry, you've experienced ministry on many levels. But why is this a burning red flag? I mean, it's not even a red flag anymore. I mean, the flag's on fire and going down in cinders.
Well, I mean, we've all heard the statement, so goes the leader, so goes the church, so goes the ministry, and it plays out in this scenario. The truth is, you can't have an unhealthy pastor or an unhealthy leader creating and maintain a healthy church in a healthy ministry environment.
Yeah.
Instead, a dysfunctional leader is going to create a toxic culture, a toxic environment, where maybe staff and team members feel used. And sometimes, in the worst case, where I have seen, the pulpits become bully pulpits, where frustration and anger just spill out. And so, again, it is a loaded question. It's a big thing, but the reality is that you someone who is struggling in a brownout situation or burning out is not going to be able to create something that's healthy, and is not able to maintain something that's healthy because they're not healthy themselves.
So you, in the midst, I know you had said you had done a conference. You had been invited to a conference, and kind of put some stuff together. And I remember you had said to me, if you're looking for John Maxwell, get somebody else. But in this information that you sent with me about how you broke down the sessions, you talk about 5 leadership myths that dominate our church culture today. I want to kind of start walking through some of those because they are a reality and they are scary. And my question, of course, as we kind of dissect these is, what do we do to try to fix them? Is going to be the challenge. Myth number one, you have it bigger, better, and success are synonymous, and becoming a great leader is key to success. So let's talk about it a little bit because I was looking when in some of your notes you say when you started ministry in the 70s, leadership wasn't a thing. Now it's an obsession, and let's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Well, there's again the 4 words, bigger, better, more, and success have become synonymous in our culture today. And again, as I mentioned to you, when I started in vocational ministry, leadership wasn't a thing, and bigness was not something that that we sought after. Um, but leadership has become more of an idol today, from what I see. Actually, there was a well-known ministry magazine, and it talked about the idol of bigness. And somehow, if we get bigger, we're doing a better job for the kingdom. And of course, if we have more, then we're being more successful. And that just seems to be the drive that many leaders are on today. And there's been a shift. I've noticed a big shift, from pastoral leadership to what I would call CEO leadership. And so we have pastors. And again, much of what I taught in this leadership intensive was very autobiographical because I found myself in senior leadership positions as a lead pastor, as an executive pastor, and I bought into this. I bought into the fact that if we become bigger, we're going to be doing a better job for the kingdom. Again, the metrics were based upon budgets and bottoms. It's all about attendance. It's all about numbers. And somehow making disciples wasn't really a priority. It wasn't something that we were focusing on.
It might scare people off when you think about it. Oh, you got to commit. You got to try to live a life like Jesus. That might be like, whoa.
I mean, we spend more time training people how to be good servants within the four walls of the church, let alone how to be effective servants outside the four walls of the church. And again, that has changed
Yeah.
over the years. When we started vocational ministry in the 70s, shepherd leadership, pastoral leadership was the focus. It was the emphasis. God has entrusted to us a group of people, and just like a shepherd, you're responsible for the health and the well-being of those individuals. To me, that has shifted. Even though we will say that we're really concerned about the health and the well-being of the people within our congregation, the reality is that we really want to become a bigger church. We want to have bigger influence, but it's a very for me it was very ego oriented. It was more about me than about God building His kingdom. It felt good to pastor a larger church, have larger budgets, being able to do more things than smaller churches can do. And so there is that leadership again has become the idol. That seems to become the key to unlock becoming bigger and becoming successful in our culture today.
And I've noticed not only in the business world and working in education, they've started this big kick and move to train people to be coaches. We're going to coach you through things. I've seen it even within in the network. Example being the Assemblies of God up here in Pennsylvania, where they have a coaching program that you can go through to be a leadership coach. And the goal, and I think you even mentioned it here, is to help you to become a better leader. But you say we really don't get the results they're looking for. They become discouraged, burnt out, and some of them just give up because they don't feel they're cut out for the job. We're almost presenting a false hope to our leadership that, if you do this program, if you attend this conference by this individual, you're going to be empowered to go back to your church and grow. I've seen on Facebook, oh, these books we help grow your church from 20 to 200. I'm the smart aleck that's in there, and I'll write in the comments, yeah, preach the word. I always find a sarcastic point to put in there sometimes, but the reality is we've got all of these tools, but we don't have a car to work on them, if that makes sense. Like there's all these tools, there's a shell, but there's no inside. So how can we kind of learn from that so that we can actually become effective in ministry?
I believe comes back to recapturing a biblical definition of what pastoral leadership is all about. I get it that there is a business component within managing local churches. I get it, but somehow we have shed the role of being a shepherd. And so, I remember going to conference after conference after conference and getting tools after tools after tools, and my toolbox was filled. And I would take the time to come up with growth plans. Now, being outside the local church, serving, in a pastoral role, now I wish what I would have done is come up with a disciple making plan versus a growth plan. So, if someone I would often tell people that I want to grow my church. Well, now I've come to the conclusion that growing the church and reaching people for Christ can be synonymous, but it's not a matter of semantics. If if God's called me to shepherd, if God has called me to lead a church, then I have to be concerned about the health and the well-being of the people that God has entrusted to me. But I also have to be concerned about reaching my community and beyond with the gospel. If I'm concerned about that, the church will grow. But if I'm concerning about growing a church, I don't necessarily have to focus on making disciples for Christ.
Mhm.
My biggest concern in growing a church is getting people into the church to fill the church so that we have more numbers and we have more financial resources to do some of the things that is in the heart of the leader to do. Again, it
Yeah.
sounds like semantics, but it's not.
And that comes down to with that myth where you talk about the thing that we have to think about is when we're looking at church leadership and we're looking at trying to build a build disciples, make disciples, not build them, but make disciples. We have to first come to the point to where how do we define success within our realms of our church? What does success look like to us? Does success look like 1,000 people who attend and a multi-million-dollar budget? Or does success look to us 125 people who are sold out for Jesus, who are doing the best they can to live as a disciple of Christ, and they're coming here and we're walking every step of the journey with them? I mean, they're two different measuring
Yeah.
components.
Yeah, again, I had mentioned that there's going to be a paradigm shift, and it's going to be a biblical paradigm shift where we go back to more pastoral or shepherd leadership. And but the other shift that that has to take place is in how we define success.
Yeah.
So if we're successful when we have more money and we're able to have more programs and we have more people coming, then to me that's a good growth plan. That's a good business plan. But I want to suggest, and I look at myself. I want to suggest that we redefine success in terms of faithfulness. So if God's called you to a particular church within a particular community, and it just so happens that that church is 150, and but yet God has called you there, and He hasn't given you a release to go on to some other to other church, maybe something that is larger, a place that's more sexier, more attractive, then you're successful if you remain planted and incarnate within that community, helping to grow those particular people, being concerned about the health and the well-being of those people. The culture today is pushing for us to have bigger churches because we believe that bigger is better and more equals success.
But see, and I know, and I like what you kind of put in this is that, and that may be the case, but size and numerical growth don't equate maturity and spiritual growth.
I,
And we could just give examples. Ted Haggard would be one, and what years ago in history, and we can look at some of these. We've gotten to success and kind of idolized these pastors, or idolized the preacher in your church, and that we've almost made them beyond human, almost like Greek gods, so to speak. And then when people attend a church because, well, I'm going to the church because Pastor Frank is there, and Pastor Frank's a great pastor, and the church grows under Pastor Frank, and then Pastor Frank retires or leaves or falls to sin, and everybody leaves instead of, well, where was your commitment? Was your commitment to being a follower and a disciple of Jesus Christ, or was your commitment and faithfulness to this gentleman? And that's going to cause for a complete shift in our focus and desire in as leaders in ministry, I would think.
yeah, I believe that the mission of the church, which is to make disciples, has got to transcend the pastor or the leader. And so when the pastor or the leader moves on or passes away, that mission is what drives the church forward. What I have seen is that we have it reversed because we do have more of a personality following, and we've created a celebrity culture. Um, and so, if you rise to a certain level, you've written enough of books, and you have some degree of notoriety. You've taken on, you've gone into a new strata, to a new level. And of course, when there's no notoriety, where perhaps you're serving is not, you're not as content any longer.
Mhm.
You really want a bigger audience, and so what happens that then it inflates the ego, and well, let's move on to something else, and to another church, where now we see pastors just cycling in and out of churches, and it takes time to build trust. You don't go in and build trust with a group of people that God's called you to do, to serve over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years. It takes periods of time.
Yeah.
So you have people cycling in and out, using maybe that particular church as a platform to get to something else that is bigger, because in your mind, that is a better environment. That's going to lead me ultimately to my career path. Then trust is eroded within the culture of the church. And so any pastor coming in following, a group of pastors that have cycled through, it's going to the amount of time it's going to take to build trust within that congregation to lead them anywhere,
Yeah.
to anything, is going to be longer.